There are nights when her voice still lingers in my mind, soft, slow, and full of the kind of wisdom that only comes from surviving love. One of those nights, she leaned back in her old wooden chair, eyes half lost in memory, and said, "Let me tell you about mothers, my dear. Not the saints people imagine, but the real ones. The ones who loved and broke and healed again." And so began the stories. Stories of women who carried too much, who gave without counting, who lost parts of themselves in the name of love. Stories where motherhood wasn't perfect, but real, with its tenderness and temper, its pride and exhaustion, its quiet moments of grace. That night, I didn't just listen to my grandma. I listened to generations of women speaking through her. Their laughter, their regrets, their love that never ends, even when it changes shape. And now I'll share them with you, the stories of motherhood, as Grandma remembered them. It was one of those slow nights, the kind where time feels tender and silence hums softly between two hearts. I sat beside my grandma, the lamp flickering like a heartbeat between us. Her hands rested on her lap, folded with the calm of someone who's seen many lives come and go. She looked at me and smiled, the kind that always meant, "It's time to talk." And so she began. She said, "When I was a little girl, I used to watch my mother's hands. They were never still, always kneading bread, mending clothes, braiding my hair tight so it would last through the day. But sometimes she would stop. Her hands would go still and her jaw would tighten. I used to be afraid of that silence. I thought she was angry. Years later, when I became a mother myself, I understood. That stillness wasn't anger, it was exhaustion, the kind that sits deep in the bones when you love everyone and no one seems to see how much it costs. I remember sitting at the table one night, my own hands quiet, trying not to cry so my children wouldn't see. That's when I forgave my mother. Silence, my dear, is sometimes a mother's last piece of strength. When she finished, I stayed quiet, feeling that stillness she spoke of, the kind that comes from love too heavy to name. Salma, her old neighbor. Her voice dropped low when she said her name, like she was protecting her from the past. After a pause, Grandma sighed, eyes far away. She said, "People talked about Salma when she left. They said she ran away from her husband, from her children. They called her selfish. But I remember the nights before she left, how her eyes looked empty even when she smiled. She'd cook, clean, and laugh on cue, like someone performing her own life. One morning, she just packed a small bag and disappeared. The neighborhood judged her, but I understood. Sometimes a woman gives so much of herself that there's nothing left to recognize in the mirror." Years later, her daughter came back to see me. She said, "Grandma, I finally understand my mother. She didn't leave us. She left the woman she couldn't be anymore." Don't be too quick to call a mother selfish, my dear. Sometimes love means saving yourself so you can love again someday. I felt a shiver then, the kind that comes from realizing how much courage it takes to save your own soul. Grandma laughed softly, her fingers tracing invisible stitches in the air. She said, "Do you know what motherhood looks like to me?" Then she leaned closer, her voice low and warm. "It looks like a quilt I once sewed with a few women in the village. We stitched our lives into that fabric. One patch was joy, another regret. One mother said she hadn't spoken to her son in years. Another wept because her daughter lived oceans away. No one judged. We just sewed and listened. That quilt still hangs in my house. The corners don't match, and the colors have faded, but it's warm, like us. Worn, uneven, but still holding together. That's motherhood, my dear, a patchwork of mistakes and love, stitched by trembling hands that never stop trying. Her words wrapped around me like that quilt, worn, imperfect, but warm enough to hold every kind of love. The air was quiet and the lamp flickered. Grandma told me about the day she forgot her son's birthday. Her eyes filled with that familiar mix of guilt and love. She said, "I worked too much that year. I was tired, stretched thin. That day passed in a blur. Dishes, laundry, worries. By the time I remembered, it was night. I found him sitting at the table, pretending it didn't matter. My heart broke. I had wanted to be the perfect mother, but life kept pulling at me from every side. The next morning, I woke him early. We went to the bakery, just the two of us. We laughed as frosting fell on our clothes. He looked at me and said, 'It's okay, Mama. You here now.' That's when I learned something I wish every mother knew. Our children don't need perfection. They need presence, softness, and truth. And sometimes an apology with a piece of cake." When she spoke of the cake and apology, I smiled through tears. It felt like every mother's story, a soft confession wrapped in love. The lamp flickered again. Grandma's voice turned to a whisper. It was late when Grandma told me this one. She said, "When my mother was dying, she asked me for a cup of tea. I held the cup to her lips and her hands trembled. She said, 'Don't live your life trying to be strong all the time. Let your children see you tired. It teaches them to care.' I didn't understand then, but years later, when my daughter saw me crying after a hard day, she held my hand and said, 'It's okay, Mama. I'll take care of you tonight.' At that moment, I saw what my mother meant. Strength isn't hiding your pain. It's letting love carry you when your arms can't anymore. That's motherhood, my dear. It begins with giving, but it ends with allowing others to give back." I reached for her hand then, not because she needed comfort, but because I did. Her eyes glowed faintly with pride and longing. Her voice trembled like a candle flame. She said, "I'll never forget the day my daughter became a mother. She held her baby like he was made of glass, afraid to breathe too hard in case she broke him. I stood in the corner, silent. I wanted to help, but I knew this was her beginning, not mine. That night, I heard the baby cry, and I heard her cry too. I wanted to rush in, but I didn't. Sometimes love means letting someone find their rhythm in the dark. In the morning, she came to me, her eyes swollen and proud, and said, 'Mama, I did it. He finally slept.' That's when I realized motherhood is a chain of small victories, each woman learning in her own way, while the one before her quietly prays she'll survive the night." I could almost hear the echoes of lullabies crossing generations. Love teaching itself all over again. She smiled sadly before speaking, like she was remembering something that still stung a little. She said, "My daughter once told me I interfered too much. It was over something silly, a baby's blanket. I said it was too thin. She said it was fine. We argued, both of us stubborn, both thinking we knew best. Later that night, I sat alone and cried. I wasn't really angry. I was afraid she didn't need me anymore. When she called the next morning to apologize, I laughed through my tears. I told her, 'You're supposed to argue with me. That's how you grow your own motherhood.' Loving a daughter who becomes a mother is learning how to let go, not of her, but of the need to be her compass. You become her quiet map instead, one she carries inside without realizing it." When she finished, I understood. Love changes its shape, but never its reason. Her smile softened. You know when you truly see your child as an adult? And then she smiled, eyes wet with memory. She said, "It was when I saw my daughter scolding her son. The tone, the look, even the pause. It was me. For a moment, I was watching my own echo." She caught herself, laughed, and said, "I sound just like you, Mama." I laughed too, but something in me softened. All the words I thought she'd ignored, all the lessons I thought she'd dismissed, they lived in her now. That's the strange thing about motherhood. Your voice becomes another woman's instinct. You become part of her forever, not by choice, but by love's quiet repetition. I could see it too, that quiet inheritance of gestures, tones, and love passed down like an heirloom. The room went still again, like the air was heavy with old regret. She said, "When my daughter was 16, I slapped her. Just once. She stayed quiet, but her eyes, they broke me. I told myself I did it for her own good. For years, I carried that excuse like armor. But watching her raise her children, I see how she never uses fear. She talks. She listens. She explains. And sometimes I wonder, was that one moment the reason she learned to love differently? Maybe my mistake became her lesson. I've never said sorry to her for that day. But if I could go back, I'd tell her this. You taught me that strength doesn't need to hurt. That's what motherhood does. It teaches forward, even through our flaws." Her eyes glistened, but her voice didn't break. It was forgiveness speaking. Quiet, humble, real. When Grandma's stories faded into the quiet, I found myself holding her hand, not out of habit, but gratitude. She didn't just tell me about mothers. She showed me what it means to be one. Imperfect, tired, forgiving, endlessly loving. That night, I realized that every woman carries her mother inside her, and her patience, her temper, her tenderness. And maybe someday I'll tell my own daughter these stories too, and she'll see me the way I see Grandma now. Not as perfect, but as human. And that's more than enough. See you next time with stories from Grandma's heart. This is the Night Therapy. Good night.